with a video regarding how to improve my pressure practice. So somebody asked me, how can I make my practice more pressurized like I feel out on the golf course? And of course, that's very tricky to do because the pressure we feel out on the golf course, we can't ever truly recreate it on the range. It's just not the same scenario. But there are a few techniques or a few components that I like to use when practicing to help try and recreate that pressure as best we can. Now, the first one would be spacing. So obviously when we're out on the golf course, we hit one of our shots, we hit our tee shot, our second shot, whatever. We've typically then got a bit of time between shots. So for example, we hit our driver, we've got a little bit of a walk, hopefully, to our golf ball, and then we hit our next shot from there. And so we need to introduce this in our practice because that time between shots, one, we got to get a control of our mindset or our self-talk, as it were. If we've hit a poor shot, we've got to make sure that we get ourselves reset and ready to go. But also just being able to manage having a bit of time between the shots, that time to have thoughts in your head and understand and making sure that we're not thinking of anything that's going to be detrimental to us. So obviously on the driving range, the problem that we have typically is that we have a big basket of balls, we hit a shot, good or bad, doesn't matter, we grab another ball, we go again. We don't get that. We don't get a quick reset out on the golf course, okay? So first thing would be introducing spacing. And an example of that would just be very simply, if you're hitting a shot, say you're doing one of the drills or the games or the performance tests, you hit your shot, you assess it, you review it, you put your score down for it, and then what you need to do is you need to walk away. You need to take a few paces away from where you're hitting, give yourself 5 seconds or so, and then come back in and start again. Go back to your full routine. So if I was doing up here at the ZS Academy, what I'd have the guy do is I'd have them hit the shot, assess, take the score, then walk over to this area over here. So I'm actually walking away from the hitting area. So I have to physically walk away from where I'm hitting and then walk back in, go back through full routine again, taking aim, setting up, etc., and then hitting my shot again. Just introducing that element of spacing is a really good way to start making it more like practice out on the, more like pressurized situations out on the golf course. The second bit would be variability. Now, this is probably the biggest thing about golf. It's arguably the most variable game in the world, in that almost no two shots are the same. And even if they are, we're hitting the same tee shot twice, they're still not exactly the same because the wind can switch up. I may be teeing off in a slightly different area, etc. There's always going to be an element of variability. But in terms of doing this in your practice or in your testing and your pressurized practice, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're not hitting the same shot twice. So whether that is changing clubs, so doing a drill whereby you've got to hit a sand wedge, then you've got to hit a 7-iron, and then you've got to hit a driver, or changing the shot you're having to hit. So, for example, if I'm doing wedge play, I've got to hit one shot that travels 20 yards, the next one's got to travel 40, or I've got to hit one high and I've got to hit one low. Ultimately, just making sure that each shot is different each time, because once again, that is what we have out on the golf course. We don't get to hit the same shot twice, assuming that we haven't bombed one out of bounds. So being able to deal with that variability and being able to switch from club to club or shot to shot, etc., that is a huge part of recreating that kind of pressurized situation you have out on the golf course. But the final one, and the biggest one of them all, is that we need to introduce consequence. Now, on the golf course, the consequence would be our scorecard. What number am I going to be writing on the score? That is the consequence of the shots that I hit. It could also be, as it were, in our own minds, what we think other people will think of us. We create a consequence, or we create a scenario in our head where we think if we hit a bad shot, we'll be ridiculed, or somebody will say something, or somebody will think something poor of us. These are the kind of pressures that we cannot really recreate in practice. The best we can do, though, is produce our own kind of like synthetic consequence. So very simply, just keeping score whilst doing the performance test, that in itself is a consequence. But if we do something along the lines of saying that if you don't complete this game in X amount of points, you've got to go home and do one of the chores you've been putting off for ages. Or what I used to like to do, and we used to do a lot in university, was used to do press-up bets, whereby if we lost the hole, you had to do 20 press-ups. And then if somebody made a bogey, they had to do an extra 10. If somebody made a birdie, they could give 10 press-ups to somebody. All of a sudden, you find yourself on the next tee sometimes having to do 40 press-ups before you even hit your tee shot. The point with this is that makes the shot you're about to hit worth so much more, because you don't want to have to do the press-ups. Now, I'm not saying you need to start doing press-ups on the range per se, although wouldn't be a bad idea. But literally just finding something that makes you, and this is the way I've always thought of it, is if you're standing over the shot in practice and you're generally kind of not worried, but you care a lot about the shot you're about to hit because you really want to make sure you get it right, that shows you've got the right kind of consequence. So just finding something along those lines can be such a great way of creating more pressurized practice to make you ready for being out on the golf course. So just to recap, if you want to make your practice more pressurized or more like the pressurized situations you have on the golf course, we need some spacing. So we need some time between shots. We need some variability. So we need different kinds of shots or different clubs, etc. Basically not hitting the same shot twice in a row. And then finally, the big one, we need consequence. We need to create some sort of consequence so that if we don't succeed at this task, there is a punishment, or if we do succeed, there is a reward. I would say both are very good. Reward tends to hold quite well, but I think there's a bit more weight, as it were, to a negative outcome if we get it wrong, because that's what we tend to feel out on the golf course, is that we tend to be negatively biased. So having a negative consequence if you don't get the outcome, that for me is kind of that's the one that's going to really get you feeling the pressure in your practice. If you have any questions on that, guys, as always, please feel free to message me, drop some comments in the video below. And as always, I'm always here if you need any help with your game.